Very good, thank you. Welcome, everybody, to our open public finance meeting. I'm going to turn the mic over very quickly to Sal Arnott. Mr. Arnott is on one of the primary members of the Finance Committee, along with Mr. Ryan and Ms. Kenny. I'm filling in for Mr. Gilfillan, and Mary Chambers is also present. Some other board members may float in as we progress, but Sal, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
So where we left off in the last budget meeting, Ms. Weber, we discussed the upcoming budget that we're going to be looking at right now, and and some good news has recently come about with state aid from the state. So we're going to be incorporating some of that in the budget, and I probably should turn it over to Mike before we have discussion.
Okay, perfect.
About it.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Arnott. So as usual, when we have an open finance committee, and we have another one scheduled, I think, for April 16th, we begin just by looking at preliminary figures in terms of where we stand and what the priorities are, what's in the budget, what's not in the budget. And then I, as well as Peter and the members of the finance committee, are happy to take any questions and discuss whatever you think needs to be discussed. So just in terms of big picture for the 18-19 budget, we continue to monitor enrollment, and for the first time in a while, it seems like our enrollment has plateaued. So we're down some students from a year ago, and we're projecting to be about flat for next year. We'll see how that all shakes out. The high school is still increasing, though, so I'll get to that in a second. State aid continues to be well below what it was a decade ago, but we will see an increase in state aid according to Governor Murphy's budget proposal from 2 weeks ago, and there is still a lot of wrangling over that budget proposal, so we're confident that we'll get at least what we've been told we'll get, and I think we could be in a situation where the legislature is going back and forth with the governor come June 30th, and it wouldn't shock me if we got a few more dollars at that point, just like we did last year.
Okay, but that wouldn't happen until the end of June.
We wouldn't know until June or July.
Okay.
Health insurance costs continue to be really the primary driver that is putting pressure on the budget. And then, of course, our revenue is based almost entirely on the 2% increase over the prior year tax levy, along with waivers for anything we qualify for. And the only thing we qualify for in terms of a waiver is health insurance costs. So a little bit more granular. Enrollment should be about flat, but Chatham High School continues to grow because the bubble is moving into the high school now. In terms of health insurance, we've been trying to adjust what we offer and contain costs, and we've done that contractually, and then recently this school year we moved into a self-insured group called the SHIF, School Health Insurance Fund, and we should start realizing more significant savings next budget. And then again, the revenue is the 2% over the prior year tax levy and the increase in state aid. So there's just a snapshot of what enrollment has looked like past dozen years or so, and you can see we hit a peak in 16-17, and we're down a little bit off that peak, but still up pretty significantly from 10 years ago. The high school, though, because that bubble is moving into the high school, 18-19, I just projected, this doesn't even include all of the kids. If all of the students from 8th grade move into the high school, these numbers will be, the number for 18-19 will be a little bit higher, but usually we lose some students to private schools. So accounting for some loss, we still will keep on going up, and that's where our greatest pressure is right now in terms of enrollment. Health insurance, we've seen double-digit increases for several years running now, and that is what prompted us to look into alternatives. And so we moved into the state, the school health insurance fund, I should say, January 1st. There was an initial payment that we needed to make in order to get into the school health insurance fund. We agreed with the group to defer that payment until the next budget cycle because that wasn't something that we had accounted for in the prior year. And then the increase that we're looking at is 9.92 for 18-19, which is actually less than what we've been experiencing in terms of health insurance, but we're hopeful that that number will come down next year.
And for reference, can you state what that number was this past year?
14.5 moving into this year, and about the same the prior year, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Peter.
And what would have been if we had stayed in the state health plan?
We weren't in the state health plan, we were with Aetna, private with Aetna. Our broker was forecasting 20% roughly.
Okay.
And the state was close to 15, even if we had switched to the state, it would have been over.
The state was 13, I think. Is that what?
No, the state increase was 13, but for us to join, if we had to encounter a 20% increase to stay private, it may have been worth looking, or the state may have been appealing, but we would have spent a lot more money than going to the shift. And the shift is projected long-term, very well run, and usually very low increases. Plus they have over a $50 million reserve.
Right. Yeah, no,
Which claims?
it's very attractive. The other two options were not.
But our CBA with the Teachers Association expires at the end of next year, so we'll be on another cycle of negotiating health benefits. In terms of revenues, almost our entire budget is made up of the local tax levy. And when you look at the local tax levy and the 2% that the tax levy may rise, districts are also permitted, in addition to the waiver amount that you might get from health insurance, to use banked cap, and that's just simply taxing authority that boards of education, our Board of Education, passed up in the prior 3 years. So if there were waivers available to the 2%, if our Board of Education didn't opt to exercise all of those waivers via taxing authority, then that money is available, or that authority is available for 3 more years. And we do have some banked cap that could be utilized this budget if the board so chose.
That will expire if we don't, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, like I said, state aid went up about $170,000. So looking at our main sources of revenue then, this doesn't include state aid, but if you factor the state aid in here, and then you look at the other main sources of revenue, the prior year tax levy was a little shy of $62 million. So there's a 2% increase to that available to the board for taxing authority. There's a health insurance waiver that's essentially based on the equivalent of how much the state health insurance plan rose. And the state calculates this figure for us. And then there's $150,000 of banked cap that the Board of Education did not utilize in previous budgets. So the maximum allowable levy that the board could entertain would be 3.62%. Yep.
And just to interject, the state requires the district to use all of the state requires the district to use all of the current year health benefit waiver before it can tap into bank cap. So,
Really?
yes, so the only way to utilize, for the district to utilize the bank cap that was generated in the years 2015-16 is to go to the 3.62%, or something slightly above, have an increase above 855,000 to use any of the
Well,
bank
that
cap.
seems also awful invasive and egregious that we have to go to 3.6 to use banked cap from previous years.
Yes, that's the state has always done that, where they require you to use the full health waiver, and anything you don't use of the health waiver goes into new bank cap, but to use the old first, you have to empty completely empty the coffers.
Right. If it goes into the new bank cap, big deal. If we can't touch it without going to the highest possible taxing authority, which we never want to do, but okay. Okay, sorry.
This is just a chart of state aid over the years, and you can see the year we fell off the cliff was 10-11, and gradually we've been climbing our way back out of the crevice.
Well, we're still a couple million shy though, correct? From where we were?
Our high point was in the $2.8, $2.9 million range, 2.9 and change, and with the amount of aid we're slated to get now, we're about 2.6 2.35, 2.34.
Okay.
So in terms of program-related priorities, this budget does not have a wide range of new programs that we're initiating or proposing. We want to maintain all of our current programs and to the best we can maintain our current class sizes. We want to continue to invest in special education programming, which is what we've been doing pretty much every year. And the one enhancement, global enhancement, if you would, it would be adding American Sign Language to the high school at least, and possibly to the middle school, depending on where numbers fall and what kind of funding is available. So I know that these charts always are very small, but what we've discussed with the Finance Committee to this point is to do these things, and I'll get into a little bit further detail, but to try to maintain all current programs without cutting any program, for example, without cutting a sport or without cutting a series of teachers that would lead to larger class sizes. We have proposed a budget or put together a preliminary budget where the tax levy would be increased by 2.98%. The 2.98% would leave on the table $245,000 of banked cap. That would expire. I believe it all expires, right? Am I right, Peter?
150 all expires.
150 of that expires, and we're left with about $95,000 in banked cap. No, I'm wrong.
250 is left. The 250 is left out of the 855,000, the 150 expires.
Okay.
So we would have 245,000 going forward for next year and the next 2 years.
Okay.
Next 3 years.
Gotcha.
But we can't access any
Right.
of that unless we choose to increase the budget to 3.6.
Not all the way up to.
If we chose, if we chose to go to 3.6, we would use all of the money available through the health benefit waiver and all of the money that we have in bank cap. So starting at the end of this year, we would have nothing left for the future.
But bank cap is essentially untouchable unless we go through all of the waivers.
That is correct.
It's just-
And I don't have, I will calculate the number.
One of the frustrating things we do with I'm sorry,
No, I was going to ask, what's the full healthcare waiver
The
availability?
full health care waiver is the $855,000.
855?
Correct.
And how much of that are we using?
Approximately
2.6.
$610,000, which would leave then the 245.
so for several years now, we've been operating on a pretty lean budget. If I recall, 17-18, we went to 2.95, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Weber?
Yes.
Okay, 2.95, and we were literally keeping the lights on. And since the last year, and since we've all experienced some of the things that we're privy to this year, some of the things that have to be on the board's radar. The mental health initiative, for example, the things we've heard about how many students are contemplating things we wish they wouldn't contemplate. A bare bones budget is just really hard to stomach on the board. Anyway, that's where we are. We're looking at 2.98, 3.62. Understood?
Yes, so let me speak to some of those, because some of that is coming up. Again, just health insurance, if you look at the health insurance increase, and the 13% is the 9.92% plus the deferred payment, that's what gets to the 13% there, minus what our employees contribute. The salary increase is almost the same amount as just the health insurance increase, so it's eating up almost the whole increase is going towards health insurance and then salary increases.
All the 2.98, not just the 2% cap. All of it is
Right.
going to salaries and health insurance.
So to your point, Sal, what is in the budget at the current time, at the 2.98 mark, is the reduction of 3 elementary level teachers. That's due to enrollment decline at the elementary level. Addition of special education staff, 612. And those are both resource room teachers and teachers that would serve in a self-contained setting. One teacher of American Sign Language. So again, we were kind of hoping for 2 teachers in American Sign Language, one for the middle school, one for the high school. We're not quite there yet. We've included 1 in the budget to this point. And then a withdrawal from capital reserve. So this doesn't factor into the 2.95, operating budget increase in the tax levy, but rather is a withdrawal from the capital reserve account to do restroom replacements at Southern Boulevard School, 2 original bathrooms. I think they are original to 1928. Repave the parking lots at Lafayette and Southern, and replace portions of the roof at the high school and Southern. What is not in the budget yet, and what we have discussed it from time to time, either at board meetings or in committee meetings, are additional staff at the high school, an additional athletic trainer, paddle and sailing club funding, supervisor of special education, and additional mental health staff like you asked. And what the Finance Committee has discussed in terms of major expenses not yet in the budget would be, first and foremost, some of this mental health staffing, a psychologist at the high school, which we've talked about probably for 3 years running now, a student assistance counselor. When Lisa and Alex were here, they mentioned that the one thing they could benefit from would be additional support. And then internally, our discussions with our principals, we know that Lafayette only has 1 school counselor for the students there. There are about 700 students in the building. That'll start to decline, but still, the 1 counselor there is dealing with a lot and is alone. So it would be nice if we were able to add a counselor. So that's not included in the budget. We also were waiting on estimates from our architect for upgraded security vestibules. We've received those, and they range for all 6 schools. This would be between $320,000 and $600,000 roughly.
Can you explain what that is when you say man traps?
That's when there are 2 sets of locked doors. So when you're buzzed into the high school, as an example, and you come in, you can't enter the building. You come in through the first set of doors, but there's another set of locked doors. So you're
Okay.
basically trapped between 2 sets of locked doors, and some districts put in place in that space some type of identification for visitors. They put them through a more rigorous process before they allow them to enter the actual interior of the school.
So, right now, it's only at the exterior door where you kind of, so you're saying that they would still have to come in and have the initial entry and then have more screening done
Yes.
inside? Okay.
Some districts, for all the parents that drop off lunches or other things that kids might forget, they have a box or something there so that parents can still buzz in and drop it in a secure location, but they don't have access to the building.
Oh, okay.
Would the additional vestibules also coincide with some sort of rearranging how the children enter and exit the school? Like some sort of security protocols to coincide with the use of those?
We haven't discussed that. They could, though.
We'd have to start school at 5:30 in the morning.
Well, it depends. Like the middle school, for example, we've talked about, and the way that the estimate came in and the sketch for the middle school would be essentially to build a wall where that stairwell is, so that students couldn't access any of the 6 or 8 doors that are there. They'd
But
have
if
to
you
go
had
to
to
the
check them
left.
for any kind of weapons, it would take,
No, not.
yeah.
Oh. I'm not saying I'm talking like, so in the morning, our students would all enter one way, but after a certain time, those students who are coming in late may have to be checked in because after the initial, that's what I'm saying, would there be like a whole new protocol and safety protocol for regular school days? Is if we're going to invest in that, how are we going to use it appropriately? Is, I guess, my question. Like, we would have to come up with some sort of plan to make the best use of that, so that doors aren't propped open on the side or dropped off. It seems that other schools have followed suit in that. Just from my friends in other districts, I didn't know if we were looking at that along with this.
Those are mainly, man traps typically are for visitors. So we haven't come up with any real significant change in how we bring students into the school, other than the idea of bringing them through only one entrance in the building.
I don't know what your next slide is, but is there anything on personnel, security personnel?
We
So-
did not, we can add that. The Finance Committee in its discussions so far has not really had a consensus about how to approach that.
Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Sure.
Well, can I just before we do that, in terms
How is
of,
your thought more, infinitely more important,
Well,
in the middle of, the one I was in the middle of, but go ahead.
well, I wanted to talk about these vestibules.
Oh,
I was
vestibules.
Just of all the different options, I'm curious how you came up with this one as, you know, in terms of, was it a, you know, like a security analysis that said this was, if we were to do something, these were our options, and this is the one you deemed as best?
I don't know if I would say that. This was one of many of the recommendations that came to us when we had the security assessment performed a few years ago. And I probably mentioned this at the last meeting, but there are pluses and minuses to all of these things in terms of whether or not they're a worthwhile investment. And we can, you know, debate that.
Sure.
There are other estimates that we're waiting to get in that vendors have not gotten back to us on yet.
Okay.
So things like panic buttons and, you know, sensor, whatever, emergency call switches and things like that. We don't have firm estimates yet, so I couldn't put them on any slide tonight.
Got it, okay. You may proceed, Ms. Weber.
Thank you, Ms. Kenny. So if I can ask the Finance Committee, to my left and my right, was there any discussion, I mean, if I could just finish, like $500,000 on man traps at one door versus the 37 other doors in a particular building, was there any discussion on, say, Class 3 officers, if I could finish, for like $30,000 apiece and just starting them at certain schools, start at the high school, start at the most vulnerable spots and then maybe build? So I'd like to hear what the Finance Committee was kicking around, but then I'd also like to hear from Dr. LaSousa. It seems that we're in the minority where we have not increased our security personnel. We have not, I look at East Brunswick, they have literally 71 retired police officers, and then after Parkland, they literally hired an additional 11 Class 3 officers. So the 71 are unarmed, and it's not that much bigger, oddly enough, their campuses. And they just hired 11, so I'm just curious what the finance was thinking, and then and I'm not on finance, this is why I'm asking, and then I'd like to hear from Dr. LaSousa, what buzz are you hearing around Morris County or some of the other J districts or the districts similar to our demographics? So, Sal,
Sure.
From
So
finance.
in finance, we discussed the possibility of putting into the budget increased security measures of various, in some capacity or another. We did not feel we were at a point where we could make a decision to put in the budget full-fledged officers, Class 3 officers, especially since we were trying to ascertain what's going to get us the most bang for the buck for what will really protect our kids. Given that you can have as many officers as you want, and that still is no guarantee, and their accuracy could be questionable, and the collateral damage could outweigh the risk of hopefully something being, a police officer or a Class 3 officer being accurate when he needs to be accurate in a moment of stress. With all of this, we wanted to discuss it further before we put it in the budget. And that's what we discussed at the finance meeting just this past week.
and none of this is in the budget, correct? This is
None
the
of it's
not
in
in
the
the
budget.
budget.
None of it's in.
Some of this would have to be special questions, or what we sometimes refer to as a second question.
Banked cap or, I mean, additional, closer to the 3.62 or second question,
Correct, either,
or nothing.
or nothing, so. you
Or
know,
cutting
$500,000
something else out and putting this in.
$500,000 on a doorway doesn't thrill me. Additional personnel, I hear what you're saying, Sal, on the accuracy, and additional personnel at a door for $30,000 seems like a better investment than $500,000 for, you know, man traps.
But I think you're underestimating, that's not $30,000, I don't think.
How much is a Class 3 officer?
I think we would estimate probably around 45, or maybe
45.
conservatively 50. That would include the hourly rates that I'm hearing about in the
Okay.
county and what our own people make now, as well as training that's required at the County Police and Fire Academy. There are uniform costs, things like that. We still have not yet approached, just because I wasn't sure of the direction of the board, our municipalities to find out what, if anything, they'd be willing to share with us in terms of cost.
We were looking to get more information at the last meeting before we could speak intelligently about it. The other thing that's interesting is you can come up with a number, we call it 45,000 per officer for the first year. They're not going to, their budget is going to rise at a lot more than the 2% a year that the teachers are rising. I think from what we understood, they tend to, their salaries and benefits or however we would be paying them would be rising at a much faster rate.
Well, that depends on the path we take. So the school resource officers are full-blown active duty police officers. They are the ones that are very expensive. And many
I'm
other.
not talking about those. I'm
Right,
talking
if we're
the
talking about
three.
class 3, then we would set the hourly rate and the salary increases and so forth, but the officer would still report to the chief of police in the municipality in which the school was located.
So how do we get from here to a second question or a special question, whichever way you want to phrase it? I'm just talking for myself, obviously. I'm not thrilled about going up to 3.6%, but I would like to put it out for the voters. Mike, could you just weigh in on what you're hearing in your academic circles on if people found them to be helpful or not helpful? Some of them are brand new, so I don't know that you'll get much feedback, but other districts that have already incorporated a class 3 officer?
In my little, neck of the woods, anecdotally, superintendents like police, and they like the police in their buildings. I'm talking about high schools now, not elementary schools. High schools, I would guess, were in the minority already in not having a police officer at our high school. We will definitely be in the minority by next year, because there are other districts, if they don't have police already, planning on going the class 3 officer route. Many of those communities, the municipality pays either full or half or some other portion of the cost of the police.
So if they're not if there's not a position in-house already, they're looking to their municipalities to help fund or partially fund, supplement those costs.
Yeah, in some places, the school district pays the full freight. In some places, it's the municipality that pays the full freight, and in some places, they share the cost. Some places, they share the cost.
And do we have any sense of if there's any additional appetite for that in our municipalities? Well, there was not on the last go-around. There was zero. We were Heisman.
I've only spoken with the chiefs of police, and of course, they're supportive of increasing police presence in the schools. So I know that the captain at the borough and the chief in the township both would be all on board with trying to get the policies, the job descriptions, all that, because that has to come from the municipal side. And they have done some research into the training requirements. It's the same training requirements as a school resource officer. So we would be able to partner quickly with them if it were the direction that we wanted to move in.
Okay. But from a financial point of view, we don't know.
From the borough or the township municipal committees.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't spoken with them, and the police, of course, they're not the decision makers when it comes to
Right.
that kind of thing, I don't think.
And Ms. Weber, I also want to point out, I'm not against class 3 officers, but I don't think we should be making a move to say, hey, other districts in the wake of a national tragedy or an epidemic of tragedies, other districts are doing this. So the safe thing for us to do would be to also, take on this cost. I want us to put some real thought into it, and if we actually believe that option A and B, which don't involve those officers, are going to do much more for the protection of the kids, be it mental health initiatives, then it makes sense that, or at least we should consider that as at least on an equal footing in terms of competing for resources with a class 3 officer.
Oh, yeah. I'm on board with that. I'm fully on board with mental health. I'd like to put that as the first special question, no doubt. I just wanted to explore the second bullet on security measures where, I just don't know that I'm thrilled about spending $500,000 on brick and mortar and
If you're going to do it, you'd rather spend it
on personnel.
Yep.
That you can
I see that.
train and talk and that can get to know the children as they come through, I just see that as an extension, quite frankly, of the mental health, that you have a personnel at the door that gets to know the kids, gets to know them in middle school and floats through the high school. To me, it's an extension of the mental health. And I'm not saying do it because East Brunswick does it, but I also want to know what the other districts are doing.
Yep.
We don't always have the best mousetrap, so I like to understand what other people are doing and try and steal good ideas from them if we deem them to be good ideas. But again, none of this is in the budget. Whatever you decide would either have to come out of the tax levy or special questions.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any?
I just am a little confused when you said we'd work with our police officers. Would we hire them? Would they be a hire of the Board of Ed or in sharing the expenses? Like, I'm not sure how you've seen that working in other towns.
They're employees of the police department, and they report to the chief of police. Now, when they're assigned, one of the differences between a school resource officer and a Class 3 is that a Class 3 can only work in a school. When they leave the school, they can't be, reassigned. It's not like in the summertime, they're reassigned to traffic duty. Their only job is the school. While they're at the school, the principal determines what their roles should be, not the chief of police. But ultimately, the person is hired by the chief of police and trained by the chief of police and reports to the chief of police.
So they would be on our payroll, but reporting to
The way that would work is, so in some communities, they're on the payroll of the police department. And when they're shared or the school district pays, basically the school district is reimbursing the municipality.
Okay, I just didn't know whether we would write the check or they would write, how that was done, so I appreciate that.
Sorry, I don't know if I can't, my thing's upside down. But even if the municipality was to pay for it, I'm going to pick on the borough, if they were to raise their taxes to cover $45,000, or we were to raise the taxes $45,000, it's coming out of the same pocket.
Mhm.
But it just,
Well,
You
Yes.
can turn your mic on.
okay. I don't know, yes or no. I mean, I think sometimes we look at our budget and we move plates around the table to make things happen and share resources within our infrastructure here at the school to make sure that we don't have to eliminate programs without adding additional monies, to do so. And I think sometimes and I'm certainly, I do not have a lot of knowledge about how a police department works and what, but I think maybe if we sat and looked together and saw I don't know, I think it's worthy of another conversation and see, I mean, I'm a taxpayer in the township. I pay my municipal taxes, I pay my school taxes. How can we do better to serve, because I'm just looking at these numbers, at Lafayette and Chatham High School alone on any given day, there's close to 2,000, not even including staff. That's a large portion of our population that's just one of our campuses. So I feel like we need to take a hard look at the numbers that we're looking to secure, and not including staff and anyone else, and look and see how I think it's worthy to go back for another conversation with both the borough and the township and see if we can take a look and see what we can do a little bit on our side and what can they do on their side.
Should we have the township liaison do that?
That's me.
Yes.
I'm
Well,
happy
that's
to
my
go.
point.
I don't
No.
have a lot of knowledge, again, how a police department allocates time and hours, and I know
Our
there's
request is
everybody.
basically for $45,000 from the borough and $45,000 from the township.
Or if not, how can we use the resources within their departments to help us better secure our facilities? I think those are the two questions. If you can't give us money, how can you help us with security?
And even though it's both,
That's just I'm
Even though
not saying they can say no, go away.
even though the taxpayers are going to pay it, whether it's from the township or the borough, or it's from the school budget, the school budget operates under different constraints than the other, but we have 2% caps. We have all these constraints that the regular municipal budget does not have. So there's probably more flexibility and
They have
ease.
caps
They have
also.
caps also.
They have they have a 2%,
Yeah,
but
they
it
have
is,
caps.
it is a different formula,
Yeah,
for
okay.
sure.
So, anyway.
So how do we get from here to there, though? How do we get,
I don't-
what's the best approach to talk to those committees? Is it something we would have to reach out to? Is it something that,
I'm happy to reach out. I didn't do that only because the discussions at the Finance Committee,
I'm happy to go.
I wasn't certain of the direction the
I
board,
think they'll like Mike better than us, though.
To reiterate, at the Finance Committee, there was a majority of the folks on Finance Committee, and Mr. Valenti, who's not in attendance, and Mr. Gilfillan and myself, are not necessarily convinced that arming and putting armed personnel in the schools is the way to protect the children. So we discussed that we needed to have more of a board discussion on that before we move forward. So maybe we're putting the cart before the horse if we're saying, let's go ahead and explore putting police officers in the schools.
And I'm only asking because it wasn't a bullet up here. There was man traps, but there was no bullet for personnel.
Yeah.
And if they were both up there, my preference is personnel versus brick and mortar. That was just, and it's cool, only because it's the only bullet up there.
And that's fair and likely very
So in
intelligent.
terms of proposing, an additional second question, or whatever the terminology is, we probably need more options for security measures in that question.
Yeah, or at least to propose it.
Right.
You know, I would like to see at least one up there for personnel, however that unfolds, rather than just the only option of being, of just taking the middle number, $500,000 for man traps at 6 buildings. I mean, personally, mental health, I think that's a no-brainer. We need to invest in mental health. I would like to see that as a second question. I don't know what.
I think we were all in agreement.
the Finance Committee was firm about that. And the other idea that Peter and I had was if we were to go the route of a second question for anything other than the mental health staffing, if it was for $45,000, let's just say, and we just did one to start with,
Right.
or for the security vestibules, if it was on the lower end of that spectrum or half of that amount, and then pick off 2 a year for the next several years.
How do you
We-
pick which ones you do? I think that's prioritizing, and I'm not comfortable with that. Saying we're going to do, Washington Avenue School this year, and then wait, and God forbid something happens, and we didn't have the security measure that we.
But I also don't want to wait and never get anything,
I
rather than
agree,
build
but
it over
I-
the next 6 years.
It would be a softer hit, if it were approved, it would be a much softer hit on the tax impact.
Are you, Sal, I'm going to direct it to you, since you're leading are you adverse or against potentially putting a second question? Mental health obviously being the first that we've all said yes to.
No, I'm not averse to it, and
Again, for the voters, not for the board to say, yeah, go up to 3 to
not for the board. We are not averse, and I think we're in agreement.
Yeah.
When we discussed in finance, we are extremely open and encouraging of several second question initiatives to be put forward to the public, mental health and security, and we envisioned in 2 separate questions exactly those things.
You kind of can't have one without the other, though. I think mental health has to be taken care of one way or the other, either through a second question or perhaps raising the tax levy, because you can have, if we continue down this road of what I call a mental health crisis, and 150 kids contemplating suicide, to me, is a mental health crisis. If we continue down this path, we can't hire enough Class 3 officers to help us. So that's
Right.
one of the most important things we can do, I believe, as a board, is to invest as much money as we can in mental health initiatives. Sure, we do need to also look at actual security personnel, and I think that's a fine discussion to have, that we should have.
So to that point, Mr. Ryan, if we took the 105,000, the 95,000, and the 90, roughly $300,000 there, what if we said that is so paramount that we've decided not to go to a second question, and again, I'm just thinking out loud, and we needed to bake that right into the budget, what does that do for our percentage? Would it go from 2.98 to roughly what? Sorry, Peter, I can,
3.2.
It goes more than 3.2. Because that's only on, if you get closer to 3.5, you get, if you put in the 295,000 for the mental health, the tax increase gets closer to 3.5%.
But I do think,
So
I mean,
you're inching up to the 3.5 or the magical max of 3.62.
Right, but I mean, I definitely agree with Mr. Ryan that there aren't enough Class 3 officers in the world if we don't take care of mental health first.
The other thing that, the other possibility would be to just take one of them. So I know I've had preliminary talks with Dr. D'Elia. He thinks that a psychologist would really be beneficial. He would like to have that psychologist work kind of like staggered hours so that they're available after school, for example, for kids to utilize instead of only during the school day.
Okay.
But if we incorporated one of those into the budget, and I mean, the point of this meeting is for you to give us direction and to hash things out, but we can
Right.
show what that would look like if we did just that, and then we can try to sharpen up the various ideas for potential second questions so that there's a bigger menu and get more feedback from you in terms of the direction you want to go.
I mean, I do think that in the past, I mean, we have tried to, although I do agree that the mental health initiative is important, we have kind of said in the past that we're going to try to maintain to the 2% as, and ask for a second question so that the voters could decide on anything above.
Right.
That we weren't.
Except for the whole 2% is eaten up by salaries and.
No, but that's been a constraint that we've always had.
Okay.
And, you know, and
Well, can the finance committee take that back and kick that around, some options, what you can bake into the budget and what you'd want on a second question or special question? Is it still a second question if the budget doesn't is in the first question?
it's
We- The only way we get there, Ms. Weber, I think, is if we start taking away Chromebooks and things like that we're spending money on.
Why can't we just increase the percentage for the 105,000 and instead of 2.98 go to 3.1?
We're about 3.2.
So split the difference, go to 3.2 just for the first bullet there because that's what the staff is saying. That is, you know, mission critical. And if the second question fails, then at least you've taken care of the number one concern of having an additional psychologist.
Is that the, I mean, we'll all have to talk about it, but are we absolutely certain that the psychologist is what we need versus the student assistance counselors?
I'd want to have a little more discussion
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so we don't know yet, right?
Oh, I thought you said, I thought you
The
said that
psychologist
that
is
was the number one
certainly,
item.
I would say that the psychologist is probably the number one item, but before, I mean, if I had to sign on the dotted line, I'd want to talk about it a little bit more.
Okay.
But we've been talking about a psychologist for some time. The kinds of needs that we're seeing, it would probably be the number one priority of the ones that are mentioned there.
Okay, let's take the content out. What I'm suggesting to the finance committee is take whatever the number one item is, bake it into the budget, and then go for a second question on the other mental health initiatives that you believe are the next in line to tackle, and allow that to be the second question.
Yeah, I don't think our work is completed on the finance committee. Yeah.
Okay, and this was the forum to get more input from the other board members, and that's my input.
I just think from a board perspective, if whatever these staffing positions will look like, if we could get a little more clarity as to, I know you just even mentioned that there could be staggered hours. Like what is our target, how can we reach the most kids? How can we structure these positions to make sure they're not in the back office and not doing a ton of testing to be tagged to IEPs and falling down that trap? Like we want these, at least I speak for myself, I would want these teachers to be working directly with students in a therapeutic and proactive manner to help them navigate their way through our schools and through their life, not necessarily writing reports and doing other things that special ed services do, which I understand require, but I would hope that this would be more student-based.
Less paperwork, more
Yeah.
high touch.
Right, that's good.
Well, that's why I kind of brought up earlier, like, in looking at the security measures, I haven't seen anything drawn up about daily protocols that the children would have to go to. There are schools where children can only go in and out of one door for a specific amount of time. Or maybe we could open 2 doors, and then anything after that hour, there's only 1 door. Like, that's a way that we could have some professionals looking at the children coming and going, and maybe have a little more control on the entering and exiting of the school. If the cost is prohibitive to harden the entrances, maybe we can just control them a little bit more.
We do that, though.
Yeah, I know, but I was just wondering if there's a way. I also know that on occasion doors are propped open on the side. That's why I was just wondering if we could maybe revisit that too, along with these things, so that we would have more room in the budget for the professional mental health people that we really, I think, is what's looking like the priority.
We could reinforce that, but currently the students go in
Yeah.
man doors, and then as soon as the classes start, they shut the door, and of course they're gonna prop door, you know,
Well, I'm just saying, like, at the beginning of the day,
right.
if we can control the beginning of the day, so that.
Well, that's probably the easiest thing that we do
That's what I'm
do.
saying. That's
It's,
what I'm saying.
it's,
That's the easiest
it's
thing
after
to do.
7:40.
That's what I'm saying, and then make sure, like, there's a protocol for entering the school. There's no other doors open after a certain time, and you can only come in and out 1 door. You know, after we get the masses in for the day. And that was my, like, that's something that's, you know, if we could put a thoughtful take on that, I think we could have some flexible children and parents that would not mind a little bit more of that in order to provide other more what we think are pressing issues.
Right.
As opposed to hard.
Sorry, Tom.
What is the, in terms of our security software, that shows through the cameras and whatnot, is it possible to get, I know that the security guards now have the ability to see doors, see everything. I know, like, through my home security system, if a door is propped open or left open, I get an alert on my iPhone saying that, like, my, back kitchen door is opened or slightly ajar. So I know that either one, that it's open. Is there a way to kind of look into, as long as it's not cost prohibitive, that after a certain time when doors are locked, if a door is propped or inadvertently left open, can that alert through, not set an alarm off in the school, but alert personnel that there is a door that is propped, that is open, that needs attention? I don't know if we have the ability to do that, but is that something we can look into?
We can look into that.
Couple of quick questions, tagging on first to Mary and then second to Michelle's point. First to Mary's point, is there, the security footage, is that live at the police station or is it live on site somewhere in the school?
Both. It's live on site.
I wanted to
The
make sure
police have access to it when they need to.
When they log in.
Right.
It's a continuous feed.
Okay.
They need to log in. Do they have it up in their patrol cars? I don't think we can answer that.
I can't answer that.
Okay. Secondly, to Michelle's point, and she makes a great point, where the best ad is when they're more high touch and involved. So rather than us making that value judgment on the wish list, I would ask you to go back to our counselors and ask them, where are we most likely to get the most bang for the buck to effectively address these issues of stress and potential suicide and the crisis that Mr. Ryan refers to. Which of those positions are most likely? Because then we can talk about baking that into the budget, and we can talk about a second question, which I'm fairly certain would be a popular second question with the population
For mental health.
for mental health.
Unsure about security
And
variations.
security, I have a feeling security is not going to be unpopular either.
Unpopular.
But yeah, I certainly think that you'd be hard pressed to find citizens in the town who are going to be against spending more resources, given what we know today on mental health. So if we could take the one that we absolutely can't risk, where we're going to have the most bang for the buck, according to Michelle, and explore putting that into the budget so that it's not at risk. And then in the second question, let's really explore what are the best ways to,
Or multiple second questions.
yes.
Multiple.
I mean, and just from a historic perspective, I think when after Sandy Hook, we did do a second question, and it
Yes.
barely passed. It was not an overwhelming support. So,
Oh, for the 6 current?
Yes.
the 6 current. So, I mean,
And I'd put to you
which is
that
fine.
lots happen, and it's
Yeah,
it's shameful to say that,
Yeah.
but, you know, after the 19th school shooting, maybe folks feel a little bit different than after the first school shooting.
The nice thing is, it's however the voters vote,
Yes,
What people
yes.
want, and, yeah.
right?
We can provide or not.
You know, up or down, it was their choice.
And
But sorry, Sal, I apologize, but if we believe that bullet number 1 is the most important, then don't put it in a second question, bake it into the budget, you know, that's our job, make the hard decision, put whatever you believe is, and I point to the finance folks, when you go back and rehash and prioritize baking in, even if you have to go above the 2.9, and if I could ask you, if you could just add a second bullet under security measures for personnel, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
I say class 3 officers because they were the least expensive, and you could get the most of them. Certainly a resource officer is an option, but they're very expensive. Just for discussion, if you wouldn't mind, Sal, if you could just add that back as a bullet to kick it around.
Thank you, Ms. Weber.
And if I could just, Mr. Ryan made a very important point, which I would like to just shout from the rooftops every time that we can get an audience. A couple of meetings ago, Lisa Lattarulo and Alex Emmer, who are our student assistance counselors, brought up some statistics. And one of the statistics that Mr. Ryan just referenced was we asked kids a number of questions. Some of it is, you know, have you ever contemplated suicide? Have you ever tried drugs? Have you ever tried drinking? Things like that. One of the questions was, have you ever considered suicide to the point that you've made a plan? So the question is, have they thought of a method in which they're going to end their lives? 52 middle schoolers answered yes to that. 100, and I think it was 50 and 102 high schoolers answered yes to that question. And that's self-reported by a student. Imagine the students that have maybe contemplated or thought about it but didn't self-report. So that was the point Mr. Ryan was saying, that mental health, it is at a critical or crisis level that he mentioned. So again, I want to throw those statistics. 152 of our between 6th and 12th graders have contemplated suicide to the point of coming up with a method in which to end their lives. That's why the board is considering mental health as a crisis or a critical issue. So I just wanted to reiterate or shout from the rooftop what Mr. Ryan just mentioned on the statistics. I don't want those lost. And I believe the Courier just ran that article again with Lisa Lattarulo and Alex Emmer. So if you want to read the detail of that, that's available online as well.
All right, so action points going forward.
Sal, can I just hit the final couple slides, just so you have all the information you need since we're wrapping up? The first is, at the 2.98, this would be the preliminary estimated tax impact for $100,000 of assessed value. So you can see, you know, annually and monthly and so forth. And you can see the difference between 362, I don't have 362 here, but that's what it is, versus 298. And then...
Sorry, Mike. So just for the, you can go to the...
Okay, so this would be the average house assessment in the borough and the average house assessment in the township, and that would be the average monthly and the average annual increase based on the 2.98.
So in the borough, to go from 2.98 to the full 3.62, it's about a $50 annual difference.
Yes.
In the township.
And just to end on halfway decent news, I just ran this again today this is from the New Jersey Division of Community Affairs. You can look at how much every community in the state pays in taxation to its schools, or for the purpose of running schools. And you can also go on the DOE website and pull down enrollment reports. And if you just look at the tax levy for school purpose only, not municipal or anything else, just school purpose, and the number of students, and just divide the number, you get the per pupil tax levy, and you can see where we fall in that mix. So even though obviously we're talking about our numbers and trying to
Right.
do the most with what we have, relatively speaking, you know, we're still not.
It's still a great value. I'm not always necessarily proud of being the bottom when we're not investing in things like mental health. So, I mean, I love that we're frugal, and I love that it's a great value, but I don't want to just say I'm at the bottom, just say I'm at the bottom, and then skip things like mental health.
I understand. And I just, maybe we'll end with Peter just mentioning what the timeline is in terms of what he has to do with submitting to the county and when you have to all adopt a final budget and the rest.
So there is a resolution on tonight's agenda for the board to approve a preliminary budget. Based on that resolution and the numbers in that resolution, we will go through all of the required paperwork and reports to send the county the budget by March 29th for their review. If the board determined to alter the budget on the next meeting of April 16th, we can just send a revision to the county. So I will ask, when it comes time to vote, if you want to leave the budget as is, or if you'd like to increase it for the $105,000 for the psychologist. So that goes in the base budget, which would bring the increase to approximately 3.2%.
And is the April 16th the final date?
Yes, because then from April 16th, that budget gets advertised, and then we have the final public hearing and the final approval. So let me put it this way. The April 16th comes with this is the budget we believe the board wants to present. Then on April 30th, we have our public hearing, and the board can still change the budget as of that date. And the April 30th is the final budget that will be reused for 2018-19.
And is that the same time that we would have to craft a second question?
Yes, the new term without having a vote is called the
Special
separate proposals, but yes.
Okay.
But the separate proposals will also have to go to the county for their review and approval, or their rubber stamping or their review.
So the separate proposals, previously known as formerly known as the second question, would have to pretty much be locked up by April 30th?
Well, before that, they should be locked up by the 16th.
By the 16th. Then I'm going to ask, when is the Finance Committee meeting again?
We did not,
The next one was the 16th.
Well, that's not going to work, is it?
so finance will schedule a meeting.
Not Wednesday? Can you, is there any way you can get, do you think you can pull together either your Finance Committee or some group of folks? I hate to put that on you, but I don't know that well, I'm going to ask you, do you think you wait till April 16th to kick around some of this discussion?
No, so it looks like tonight we're going to vote on the 2.9. And we're going to address in an interim meeting whether we're going to add in $105,000 for some type of mental health professional. Sound fair?
And then maybe
Yes.
craft some potential special questions or separate proposals?
Two separate proposals, one for security, one for mental health, one for mental health, additional mental health, one for security, and we're going to make sure that the security doesn't just include the man traps, but also includes men on the ground, Class 3 officers.
So,
We're going to need another meeting.
okay, Sal, would you mind, in the interest of time, would you mind working with Peter on trying to come up with a date, and maybe Lotta and Mike, because you're on, right?
I'm on finance.
You're on finance? Right, isn't it Mike, you, Lotta, and Matt?
Yes.
Okay, so three of you are here, so maybe you guys can work with Peter?
Yeah.
And we'll figure out Matt. If not Matt, then I'm the alternate, and I'll fill in for Matt. Sorry, Dr. LaSousa, did you have additional slides?
That's it.
That's it? Sal, did you want to?
Yeah, I think
Wrap up?
in recapping, in prior years, we've been focused with increasing enrollment, where healthcare and teacher salaries pretty much eat up all of the increase we're allowed to increase each year. The budget's amount to go up. So basically, the base case, this 2.9% perpetually each year, is what just keeps the lights on. And it's increasingly challenging for the board to address how do we want to do more than keep the lights on. First of all, we want to make sure that we're handling this mental health crisis that we're facing. And secondly, we want to add and be creative with improving the curriculum, with things like American Sign Language teachers. These types of things make the school district continue to grow. And I think that's important, specifically given the fact that while this year enrollment may have leveled off and tapered off, we're looking at construction projects in the area over the next few years where that tapering off can quickly change. So we as a board are challenged. We have a business model where our costs are variable and our revenues are fixed. It's a lousy business model. So we continually are trying, and with the creativity and hard work of the administration and of Matt and everyone here on the board, the challenge is to work with that horrible business model to come and put forth a world-class education for our students, to make sure that they're as safe as possible, and to continually improve the curriculum. And that's the challenge, and the budget that you presented, that we're going to vote on tonight, shows a base case scenario of 2.9%, which pretty much keeps the lights on. We're going to discuss adding a few more things, or we're going to amending that budget slightly into the tune of $105,000 for April 16th, and we're going to explore these second proposals. So that's pretty much where we stand, and that's the challenge, but I wanted to recap it like that, and I think it's important for people to understand these constraints.
And I would just say one thing, the biggest driver of a lot of the expense we have is, we talk about it all the time, is healthcare cost. And I think, well, I wasn't involved in the shift, right? Is that what it's called? Shift?
Sure.
Yeah. That appears to be stabilizing a little bit. The percentage increase is, in healthcare costs, is lower this year than it was last year. So that's a positive step. We'll see, I think we should continually meet with our insurance brokers and get more data to see if we can determine if we can expect further decreases in the percentage increase in the years to come. We have to really stay on top of that to make sure that we're in the right position and we can anticipate.
We do, that's an annual conversation that we have with Brown and Brown, and it's always with, banging on their tables, you gotta help us get lower. So it is part of the process, I know you knew, I just want to say that we do that every year, and that's why the shift to shift, that's why sometimes we look at the states, that's why we look at private, we're always looking for the best coverage for the lowest price, but Mike brings up a good point. We've at least stabilized. We're not looking at 14 to 20%. We're at least at 10%. So hopefully that trend will continue. But that is part of the normal operating process that we look at it every single year. Does anybody else have anything else before we close finance?
Thank you.
Mr. Ryan, you're good? Sal, you're good? Thank you, Sal, for running the finance meeting. I appreciate it. Tom, can you just give us a couple minutes to set up and rejigger? Absolutely. Thank you, sir. We're going to start the regular public Board of Ed meeting in just a couple of minutes. If you could just give us a moment.